Hi everybody, it's Senpai Fanfics back at it with another amazing content to What If Deku Famous Author Who Works Being Quirkless. If you guys would like to see more videos like this in the future, hit the subscribe button and notifications on for more videos like this. Thank you to the creator of the fanfic, which will be linked below. Let's start it. No kidding, Izuku chimed in. He grinned. Such is life here though. He whistled and went back to the boxes of figures, grabbing a few to restock the display with. Okako looked at Izuku, her eyes full of concern. You okay, Izuku? You seemed nervous. He tried to smile and laughed it off. I'm fine. Just a bit jittery, I guess. He checked his watch. You know, I think it's about time for my break anyways. I did promise you some coffee, didn't I? He smiled at her. Wanna go? Can you leave while it's like this? Okako asked. Oh, we'll be fine, Izuku chimed in from the display. He looked at the two of them and shrugged. It's slowing down a bit as customers take their time, the display is doing fine, and Tenya and EMI are doing awesome. Just bring us back something to eat, Izuku. I'm starving. Will do, Izuku said as he began to walk towards the entrance, Okako trailing behind him. Thanks, Izuku. As soon as they left the bookstore, Izuku took a deep breath. It felt nice to be away from the chaos of the bookstore. Okako walked up to his side and looked at him out of the corner of her eye, smiling. So, who were those two guys exactly? Eijiro and Kaken? Izuku asked. Eijiro is a high school friend and one of Kaken's roommates. They actually live in the same building as me, just a couple of floors up. Kaken is an old friend from grade school. Izuku sometimes thought calling Katsukiya a friend was a bit of exaggeration, but he still hoped. We've known each other, well, for as long as I can remember. And he calls you Deku? Okako asked. Izuku grimaced, preparing himself for the teasing. Kaken had always called him Deku once he learned that it meant the one who can't do anything, and made sure to make that clear to Izuku. He hated the name, and when he started high school, away from the kids who knew him as Deku the weakling, he was glad to start over. Even with Kaken following him, he still found friends, managing to escape the torture. They knew Kaken called him that, but they never asked why. He thought that Tenya had an idea, but the topic was never broached. And while he doubted Okako would actually tease him, it might change how she saw him. I think it sounds cute, she said cheerfully. Izuku nearly stopped when she said that and looked at her, eyes wide and his mouth falling open a little. She turned and smiled at him. Deku. I think it suits you. It sounds cute and almost heroic. Like someone All Might would work with. Deku the hero. She clenched her fist and grinned like All Might, teeth bared in a friendly smile. Come, Deku. We have to stop Hellken before he frees all for one, she said in an over-the-top, deep voice. Izuku laughed and felt his worry ease away. I never thought about it that way before, he said. But you know, when you say it like that, it does kinda sound heroic. He grinned. Though your All Might impression needs some work. Well, Deku, she said in a huff, her eyes sparkling, you give me yours. Izuku scrunched up his face, performing All Might's trademark grin, and gave a thumbs up. Never fear, for I am here, he said with as deep of a voice as he could. Halfway through here though, his voice cracked and the two of them ended up laughing. Okay, maybe both of us need to work on it, she said as they stopped in front of the cafe. She opened the door and waved Izuku in, and he led the way to a small table. The cafe was a local place, in a too-small building, and the owners were the sweetest people imaginable. Izuku and Tenya had spent plenty of late nights in here working on paperwork for the bookstore, and they were close to the owning family. What do you want? Izuku asked as she sat down. He smiled and took out his wallet. My treat. She frowned and opened her mouth to speak, but Izuku shook his head. Nope, not taking no for an answer. You can treat me next time, but let me do it this time. She pursed her lips, but nodded. Fine, but next 2 times are on me. Izuku laughed and nodded, even though he had every intention of treating her every time. His mom had drilled into him that he should always offer to treat, to be polite and kind. He grabbed a tea for himself and a latte of some kind for Okako. While coffee sounded amazing to him, he knew that having 3 coffees in as little time as it had been often ended up extremely poorly for him. So, a simple tea would have to do for now. He sat down and passed Okako her latte and then smiled sheepishly. "So, I know you said you wanted to meet up and hang out, but I was wondering, I finished the piece for you." Her eyes widened and she smiled. "You did? Can I read it? Please?" She was adorable, he thought. "Of course. Just, no promises." He took out the notebook and opened it up to the correct page before passing it to her. "I kinda wrote it all last night, so it's probably not very good, but I wanted to do my best." "I bet it's awesome." She happily took the notebook. He figured the first paragraph or so would bore her. Just generic stuff, he thought, describing the beast and the angel, and she already knew what they looked like. She would probably be bored by it. Hell, even the fight scene wouldn't be anything interesting. Ilyasa swept her spear at the demon, keeping it away from her. Her spear's flame cast strange shadows on the ground as it just missed the demon. The demon, for its part, didn't even seem to care about the flame. It dodged and then rushed her before she could react. She leapt back, her wings pushing her away, but not before she felt a searing pain at her side. The demon's claws had ripped into her flesh and she could see her silvery blood on its claws, its eyes glinting in the light of her flame. She screamed in pain and anger, and as she landed on her feet, as the demon rushed her again, she twirled her spear and slammed it along the ground, releasing a blade of golden fire. The wolfish beast didn't move fast enough, and the fire sliced through it. 2 halves stood in place as the flames died. The wounds cauterized from the intense heat, and Ilyasa allowed herself a smile. Only to have it die out as the 2 halves began to turn to ash, which swirled around on the ground before her. Slowly the ash reformed itself and the demon stood among her again, hardly injured. The demon looked at her with a sick grin and slashed the air. The air itself seemed to buckle and then break, screaming, as dark waves slammed into Ilyasa. She screamed and leapt to the sky, her wings pushing her up, leaving flames falling behind. And yet the demon followed, leaping up into the sky after her, dark energy brimming around him as he howled. "Enough!" Ilyasa screamed. She brought her wings together and then pushed out hard in a mighty flap. The air around them shimmered as a wave of tremendous golden fire was released, directed at the demon, bright enough to light up the field for miles and drive back the darkness around the twisted creature. "Burn, fell creature!" Ilyasa commanded, her voice carrying for miles around as the flames not only burned away the beast's body, even as it reformed, but threw him to the ground. She held her spear high, twirling it above her head as flames gathered onto its point, becoming almost a second sun in the sky, and then she plummeted towards the stunned monster. It was fast enough to react though, even with its legs still gone, pushing out with a wind of darkness. Ilyasa plunged through the shadows, her spear leading the way, its flames and point severing and burning the darkness before her. When she got close, she plunged the spear into the beast's chest. It howled in pain but reached up and dug its claws into her side, talons piercing her flesh as it started to squeeze. Ilyasa grit her teeth though, and poured power into her spear, creating a pillar of flame to burst forth from the spear, burning the beast. The howl that came from it was one of pure pain and rage and was the most disturbing thing she had ever heard. And then, its claws releasing her, the howl ended, and the demon died. Izuku knew the ending was a bit anticlimactic, but he wanted to finish for her today, and well, he hoped it was good. He watched as she stopped reading and prepared himself for the comments. Whether it was okay or could be better. And that was assuming she didn't just tear into him for not having done her pictures justice. Instead, she smiled, her eyes incredibly bright. "Deku. Oh my god. That was awesome." He blinked and tried to speak a few times, but he couldn't manage it. Words couldn't come. "I can't believe you came up with this just by a couple of my drawings." She laughed. "They weren't even that good, too." Are you kidding? Izuku asked. Your pictures were awesome. I thought I didn't do a good enough job though of showing how cool they were. She laughed again and shook her head. Nope. Your story blew my drawings away. She clenched her fists and leaned across the table, her eyes determined and focused. Now I just have to do better. I'm going to draw a scene from this, and I'm gonna blow your socks off, Deku. Just you wait. Izuku grinned and held out a fist. Okako looked at it and then met his eyes, a fire burning in hers. Well, this was certainly getting interesting. And I'll just have to match whatever you make. Let's go beyond. Okako said with a big, happy grin. Plus ultra. They shouted and bumped fists, and Izuku felt himself feeling something he hadn't felt for a long time. He was feeling excited about writing again. Okako looked at the drawing before her with a critical eye. It was good, she decided, the flames rushing off of Ilyasa giving the page plenty of life and power, and the darkness looming from the demon a nice contrast. But it didn't feel right just yet, she decided. It wasn't giving off enough energy and excitement, the kind of energy that reading Deku's piece gave her. Still, she had time to improve. She knew she could do better. Deku deserved nothing less than her best. She put the drawing to the side and stood up to stretch, a big yawn escaping her lips. She had been working on the drawing for the last couple of hours, and continuous work like that always tired her out. Okako turned off her desk lamp and drudged from her desk to her bed, throwing off her clothes and changing into sweats and a long t-shirt. A text from Deku was waiting for her on her phone, and she smiled at the nickname. It felt so right to her, she couldn't help but think of him as Deku now. I know you said you were going to be drawing for a while, but I thought I would check up and see how you're doing. She smiled at the text, imagining his voice and soft smile. I'm all good, she replied. Tired, but such is the price for good work, you know. Drawing is coming along great. He replied immediately, despite the fact that it was probably close to 1. She didn't have classes the next day, so she was fine with staying up, but she could hear Zu softly snoring in the next room. That's awesome. But, of course it would be great, it's you doing the drawing. Okako giggled and shook her head. She collapsed onto her bed and held her phone up, typing her reply back. You spoil me with praise, Deku. Why are you up so late, anyways? Can't sleep. I don't know why, but I just can't. I thought talking to you would help. She smiled softly. Well, I'm always happy to talk to you, Deku. She paused and thought about him for a second. They had talked a lot, mostly about common interests, but she had never really learned much about his personal life. Mind if I ask you some questions, though? I feel like I know a lot and nothing about you at the same time. Go for it. Deku sent a sticker of All Might giving a thumbs up, and Okako laughed, trying to keep it down to not wake up Zu. Well, let's see, how did you meet Zu and them all? Zu's never really explained it either, and I'm really curious. A minute or so passed before he responded. Honestly, I'm not really sure how it happened. We were all in homeroom together, and things just started coming together. Tenya was my first friend, Zu was soon after. We just seemed to click, and then the others slowly joined up as well. That class was crazy, to be honest, but I miss it. Oh, Okako replied with a small smile. That sounded way better than her days in high school. It wasn't that she had been lonely, but none of her friends had felt like friends. None of them gave her the same warm feeling that she got talking with Zu or Deku. Any embarrassing stories from back then? At the same time, Deku sent her a text as well. What about you? How was your high school? Her smile died a little and she was tempted to lie, but Deku didn't deserve that. He deserved the truth. Honestly, not great. I had friends, but it was nothing like how I was with Zu back in middle school. Just a couple of people I talked to and hung out with. I know how that feels, he texted back after a few seconds. In middle school I went through something similar, you could say. Well, at least neither of us have to worry about that now. Speaking of which, sad talks are no good for when you're trying to have a chill night. Tell me something embarrassing that happened back in high school. Deku sent another All Might sticker, this one of the hero sweat dropping. Well, there was that brief point in time I had a crush on Zu. That was something else. Okako grinned. Zu had never ever mentioned that. You and Zu dated? Deku, I need details. That's my best friend you're talking about. We didn't date. She could practically hear his panic. It was a brief crush I had on her, and it was so one-sided it's embarrassing. Let's just say, long story short, I tried to ask her out to a school dance sophomore year, but got so nervous I ended up falling into a fountain. Okako laughed, picturing a young Deku. His freckles were much more prominent in her imagination, are blushing and tripping into a fountain. And then I got super sick the next day. My mom was worried sick for weeks after, and she thought I was going to die because of the fountain. I took that as a sign and gave up on liking Zu. That was it. That killed Okako, and she just started laughing, flopping onto her stomach to bury her face in her pillow, trying to muffle the noise. When she finally calmed down, she replied to him, still giggling slightly. You're kidding. How has Zu never told me about this? That's amazing. I mean, now it's pretty funny. Well, even back then Shoto and Tenya thought it was hilarious. I was just a little miffed at the universe for treating me so poorly. Any other crushes? Okako asked, a sly-faced emoji following her words. For me? I decided that the fountain incident meant romance wasn't for me. The others had some phases though. What about you? Any big drama back in high school? She bit her lip and chuckled quietly to herself. Not really. I was just focused on doing well in school to want to date anyone. That was close to the truth, she decided. It took a bit before Deku replied back, during which time she felt her eyelids grow heavy. Sorry, Aizuru needed help with something real fast upstairs. I should probably let you go to sleep too. I'm fine, she texted, puffing up her cheeks. The fact that she dropped her phone on her chest a moment later and almost fell asleep right there meant nothing. Who? He was clearly unconvinced. Night, Okako. We can talk more tomorrow, or rather later today. Get some sleep. She sighed but decided that he was right. Sweet dreams, Deku. She put her phone onto her nightstand and closed her eyes, falling asleep almost immediately. Thursday afternoon. The next couple of days went by uneventfully for Okako. She had settled into a familiar grind, go to classes, go to work, draw, and talk to Deku and Zu when she could. It was nice, familiar, and easy. It felt like every night she and Deku texted, usually about nothing in particular, just sort of aimless chatter about books or movies or music. He really was a huge, adorable nerd, and it was fun teasing him about it. But he was super sweet, and the stories he told her from high school gave her the sense that he had always been that way. But there was something hiding there that she wanted to dig at. Little things that he mentioned that got to her, made her think and try to figure out ways to broach the topic. At the same time though, she had been drawing like crazy. The more she talked with Deku, the more she wanted to finish the drawing and wow him. And this draft, this one was the one. Or close to it. She had done the sketch and was working on touching it up before she decided to ink it. She couldn't wait to show Deku and see what he thought, and, even better, see what he wrote up for it. It was driving her crazy with excitement. She began to think about another drawing idea she had, one that Deku hadn't written but seemed like it fit in well. Besides, she had to give him something new to write, didn't she? As she began to plan out the drawing, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Pulling it out, Okako saw a text from Zu. Okako, I was gonna go out to lunch with Gyro and Momo and we were hoping you would come with. Toru and Mina are back from their trip and we were planning on meeting up with them. Okako considered it. She hadn't spent a whole lot of time with Gyro and Momo, and they seemed like great people, girls she should get to know better. And if she was being honest, having only Zu and Deku as friends probably wasn't the healthiest thing. So she texted back a cheery yeah. And then set out for the address Zu sent back. It wasn't too far, and she found herself there about 20 minutes later. Her jacket, though, was not enough for the chill fall air. Winter wasn't too far off, and she knew she needed a new jacket, but it could wait. Zu was outside the small diner and waved as she walked up. "Hey, Okako. Glad that you could come." She smiled back and hugged Zu briefly. "I'm excited to meet more friends of yours, Zu. So, is everyone inside?" Zu nodded and led her into the diner. The group was near the back, at a big semicircle booth table. Gyro was the first to notice them, waving with a lazy motion. Momo looked up and smiled warmly. The other two girls, Mina and Toru, looked over and both grinned. "Nice to meet you." One of the girls reached over the table, her hand extended. She had messy-looking short hair that was, Okako couldn't tell if it was dyed pink or was that way naturally. Her face was kinda flushed as well, and her eyes were bright gold in color. "I'm Mina Ashido." Okako smiled and shook her hand, pausing as she realized the girl had horns. Was that even possible? Mina tilted her head and then laughed. Her other hand reached up and pulled a headband with 2 yellow horns attached. "Just an accessory of mine, don't worry about it." The other girl, Toru, laughed and Okako smiled sheepishly. "Sorry, it just blended in with your hair." "Kinda cool, huh?" Mina said with a wink. She leaned back and grinned, her eyes shining. "My turn." Okako turned and smiled at Toru. She was shorter than the others, with a big smile on her face and an energetic air about her. Her eyes sparkled and twinkled like little stars, and Okako thought she was rather cute overall. "I'm Toru Hagakure. It's so nice to finally meet Zu's new roommate." "It's nice to meet you, too," Okako said with a smile. Once introductions were out of the way, the booth seemed to devolve into chaos. Mina began to talk animatedly about her and Toru's trip, with Toru chiming in every now and then about crazy things that had happened. Okako just sat there and watched as the conversation went on, Kyuka making a snarky remark about Mina being thirsty as hell after the girl discussed, in detail, a guy who worked at a cafe near where they stayed. The conversation only paused so they could give their orders. Okako was amazed that Mina even knew what she wanted. She hadn't glanced at the menu once. Mina ended the story of the trip rather abruptly, but by that point, Okako had sort of zoned out. She couldn't keep up with the story and the little in-jokes. She was then surprised when she heard Mina call her name. "So, I talked up a storm," Mina said with a pleased smile. "Now it's your turn, Okako. What brings you to our city?" "I go to UA actually," Okako said with a small smile. "I study art, mostly for comics and stuff like that." "An artist?" Mina nodded, her eyes closed. It almost seemed like she was approving of Okako's choice. "That's awesome." "Oh, so that's what you were talking about with Izuku," Momo said, nodding in understanding. Okako nodded and turned to Mina and Toru. "What about you, Mina and Toru? What do you guys do?" "Nothing too exciting for me," Toru said with a sheepish laugh. "I'm just taking the education course over at UA, trying to become a grade school teacher with a focus on English." "That's plenty exciting," Zu said with a smile. "Don't sell yourself short, Toru." The shorter girl laughed again and nodded enthusiastically, her hair bouncing around. "I'm a dancer," Mina said with a big grin. Okako wondered if she ever didn't grin, though she didn't mind. Mina had a friendly air about her, and her smile was cute and welcoming. "I'm not really studying anything. Instead, I work at this dance studio where I help teach dance lessons to kids. It's so much fun." Kyuka snorted and then glanced over at Okako. "I never really did talk much about myself at the party, did I? I go to UA too, studying acoustics." Her professors adore her, Momo said with a fond smile, and Kyuka rolled her eyes, blushing. You should come drop by her little studio. It's very cool. Denki certainly likes it, Mina said with a glint in her eyes. I wonder what else goes on in there. Kyuka turned a deep red and Okako looked on with interest. Something was going on and she was very, very intrigued. Mina Ashido, you continue to joke about that and I will stab you with this fork. I swear to God. Momo turned to Okako and smiled apologetically as Mina burst out laughing. You'll have to forgive them, Okako. They can be a bit much. Okako smiled and resisted the urge to giggle. Zu and Toru were having a calm conversation. Well, Zu was calm. Toru was as energetic as Tenya, if a bit more in control. Mina was still teasing Kyuka, Okako thought. And Kyuka was clearly trying to not hurt her. If anything, Momo seemed to be underselling them. And yet, Okako loved it. It felt like a big family in a way, just chaotic and fun. It's all good, Okako said with a big smile. Besides, this is kind of new to me. It's fun to watch. A thought occurred and she tilted her head to the side. You go to UA too, right? What do you study? Material science, Momo said. It may not sound like much, but it's sort of like an offshoot of chemistry, but focused on making new things. Her eye sparkled and Okako got a feeling this was something Momo was ready to talk about for days. Ooh. What made you get into it? Momo put a finger to her chin and thought for a bit before she shrugged. I don't know, to be honest. My parents are both from a wealthy background. My dad is in finance, so it wasn't like I had a science bass. Thank you, Okako, Momo said, giggling slightly. So what made you want to pursue art? Money-wise it seems a bit risky. Okako bristled slightly, trying to ignore the old her who saved every penny, who obsessed over finding the most profitable thing to study in school to help out her family. It is, she admitted slowly. But I always loved comics and always tried to make my own when I was younger. My parents were the ones who eventually decided to push me to really pursue art, because they knew how much I loved it. At this point, I guess it's out of my love for it and because I want to come back to them as a known artist. Okako stopped and blinked, finding Momo's eyes watering and her smile trembling. Momo? Are you okay? That is so sweet, she squealed, clasping her hands together. Truly, your parents are blessed to have you, Okako. She wiped away her tears and smiled. Sorry. I got carried away a little, I suppose. Just a bit, Okako laughed. Mind if I ask you a bit more about your group? I didn't really want to intrude during the party. Momo nodded and made a gesture as if to invite questions. Did you guys all go to school together? Izuku mentioned high school with a lot of you, but he was never very clear. Momo nodded, her smile a bit more nostalgic seeming. We did. In fact, we were all in the same homeroom, oddly enough. It was a bit of a crazy mess and at times, it felt like we were all competing with each other. At least I was with Shoto. For what? To be the best student, Momo said. Our teacher, Mr. Aizawa, was intense and fostered an environment of both competition and cooperation. I was determined to be the smartest in the class. Shoto was one of the smartest kids in the class as well, alongside Izuku and Tenya. I remember the nights of study sessions that often devolved into us quizzing each other and then watching anime. Momo sighed happily. Those nights were something else. I met all of my best friends in that class. Without it, I wouldn't know Kyuka or Mina or any of them. Damn straight, Kyuka said, leaning towards them, apparently finished threatening Mina. That class brought us all together, for better or for worse. There are days I miss it, with the awkward relationship drama, the hilarity. Kyuka grinned. Good times, though, some of the drama never really ended. She gave Momo a knowing smirk, and Momo looked away, blushing. Okako's eyes widened and she leaned forward. What kind of stuff happened? After food, Kyuka said, eyeing the waitress as she approached with their plates. Then I'll give you some of my favorite stories about high school. I wanna join in, Toru exclaimed. There are some great stories back then. Like how I and Mashirao got together, or that day when Izuku punched Shoto in the face. Okako nearly choked on her water, and the waitress asked if she was okay as she passed out the plates. Okako waved that she was and turned to Toru. Izuku. Punching someone? It was complicated, Zu said. Personal too, from what we know about it. They don't really talk about it, Mina said. Momo sighed and nodded. I've asked Shoto about it before, and he would just get this distant look in his eyes and say that it was a long story. And then they became really close, Zu said. She shrugged as if to say the boys are weird. I mean, that story is good, Kyuka said, popping a fry into her mouth, but my favorite is the first time Momo watched anime. Momo blushed beside her and muttered something under her breath that Okako couldn't hear. See, it was me, Momo, Shoto, Izuku, Denki, and Toru. You were there, yeah? Yeah, that's right. Anyways, we had just finished studying and Denki wanted to watch something, so he went online and pulled up Full Metal Alchemist, Brotherhood. And it turns out that Momo hadn't seen it or any anime, so Denki got this crazy idea dash. As they sat there telling stories and laughing, Okako found herself enjoying the girl's presence a lot. She had always enjoyed hanging out with Sue, but it was nice to see her best friend laughing and telling stories with her friends from high school. And the girls were so sweet. Mina was something else, and she would probably exhausting after a while, but Okako thought she was nice and funny. Toru was so cute with her energetic air about her, and while Kyuka seemed to be laid back and chill, she got into as much as everyone else. Momo wasn't as posh as Okako thought at first, or at least, she was able to go between having fun and being elegant. And even though they talked a lot about high school, the girls did their best to include Okako, and for the first time since middle school, she felt welcome. Momo insisted on picking up the check, saying that she was happy to pay for everyone. Okako tried to protest, but Momo didn't allow for debate. As they left the diner and parted ways, Zu and Okako started walking to their apartment, waving bye to their friends. So, Zu said after a bit, what did you think? They're super great, Okako said with a big smile. Mina and Toru are so fun to talk to, and Momo and Kyuka are just awesome. Zu nodded and seemed happy with the answer. I'm glad to hear that. Oh, by the way, do you mind if we stop by Plus Ultra? I need to pick up a book for class. I don't mind one single bit, Okako said with a chuckle. It just means I can bother Deku. She froze a bit, feeling embarrassed that she just called Deku, well, Deku, in front of Zu. No one else but Katsuki called him that. What if Zu found it weird that she called him Deku? She looked over at Zu, who was just smiling. She did make a little sound, but seemed unfazed by the slip-up on Okako's part. Good, Zu said. I think Fumikage might be there too, so maybe you can meet him too. Fumikage, that name sounded really familiar for some reason, but Okako couldn't place it. A few minutes later they entered Plus Ultra Books. A tall, skinny redhead girl was at the counter and smiled cheerfully at them as they entered. Welcome to Plus Ultra Books. Zu waved hi and then vanished into the shelves, letting Okako know she would text her when she was ready to go. Okako, for her part, wandered the store, just looking around. It was slow again, but it seemed rather peaceful. She could see finding a spot in here and just sitting and reading. As she walked the shelves, she spotted a flash of green and moved towards it. She soon found Deku squatting on the ground next to another boy. Deku! The green-haired boy whirled and smiled at her. Okako! Glad to see you. What's up? The boy sitting on the ground next to Deku looked up and eyed her. He had strange red eyes that looked rather bird-like, sharp features, and a beakish nose. His black hair was a mess from what she could see of it under his dark hood. The hoodie he wore had a hood that hung over his face, casting it into darkness, with a beak at the end, giving him a raven-like appearance. And he looked very familiar too, but she couldn't place how or why. Just stopping by with Zu so she can a book, Okako said with a smile. Looks like you're just chilling today, huh? Deku laughed and shrugged. Not every day can be crazy. The boy on the ground looked up and spoke, his voice shockingly deep. You must be Zu's roommate. He stood, coming up a couple of inches below Deku. I am Fumikage Tokoyami, a close friend of Zu's. It is nice to finally make your acquaintance, Miss Uraraka. Zu has told me much about you, but alas I was away for a while and could not visit to properly introduce myself. He closed his eyes in a dramatic fashion. Truly, fate is wondrous and mysterious, though. Okako blinked and looked at Deku, who smiled sheepishly. Then she turned back to Fumikage. Zu's mentioned you before, too, Fumikage. It's nice to meet another friend of Zu's. There you guys are, Zu said, walking behind Okako with a bag. I found my book faster than expected and was looking for you guys. She smiled when she saw Fumikage and moved up to him quickly, pulling him into a tight hug. Fumi! You're back! Fumicage's face turned beet red, but he hugged Zu back, resting his head in the crook of her neck. Fumikage, Okako remembered where she had heard that name before. It had been in high school, Zu excitedly texting Okako about this boy that she had liked, culminating in Zu asking him out in senior year. The two of them had then gone out and Okako remembered seeing the picture of them together at a dance. That's why he looked familiar, though in the picture he hadn't looked so dark and brooding. Oh. You're Zu's boyfriend. Fumikage seemed to blush even more, but Deku chuckled at her side. Did you seriously forget? Zu asked, giggling as she separated. I told you all about him. 2 years ago, Okako pointed out. You may have mentioned. Deku flushed and started looking around, as if for help. It's a long story. Let's just leave it at that. Okako laughed and patted his head. I won't push, she said with a smile. And don't worry about the drawings. I'll get them done and you're gonna be floored. She clenched a fist and gave him her determined look. Just you wait. I'll wait as long as I need to, he said with a small smile, his cheeks still flushed. Take your time. Will do. Now I should go meet up with Zu so we can get back and so you can keep working. Bye, Deku. He waved by as she retreated to the front of the store, a small, cute smile on his face. Fumikage and Zu were hugging when Okako met up with her roommate. She let them have the moment. Fumikage had been gone for a couple of months. Zu had let her know when he had left and had occasionally lamented feeling alone. As Okako waited though, she felt a pang of envy. She was happy for her friend, but she had never had anyone like that in her life. Never once did she have a guy ask her out or even seem to like her. Sometimes she forgot how lonely high school had been. That night. She hadn't meant to sketch out the picture before her, but Okako found herself loving it. After dinner and the subsequent cleanup, Okako had retreated into her room as usual to work on her art. She had been intending to go right into the drawings of Ilyasa, but found herself feeling oddly inspired to create something new. For some reason, she remembered Momo standing outside the dinner as they were leaving and she was soon sketching out her figure. But instead of drawing Momo as she was, Okako decided to give the drawing some flair. She gave her form-fitting armor with a long, flowing cloak. In her hand was a warhammer that seemed to weigh a ton, a shield on her other arm. The armor was flawless looking and Momo gave off an air of self-assured confidence, elegance, and power. When she finished, Momo looked a lot like a paladin from a video game and Okako found herself giggling. It was sort of a funny idea, imagining the sweet Momo bashing in skulls with that hammer, but she was also interested in it. Maybe she would show Deku the image and see what he thought about it. Maybe she blinked. An idea struck her and she smiled, ripping out a piece of paper and scribbling down her idea to make sure she didn't forget when morning came. She would tell Deku about it when she finished the drawings. For now though, she was tired and decided to head to bed. She turned her lamp off and flopped onto bed with her phone. Briefly, Okako imagined what it would be like to have someone waiting in bed for her. Zu had been honest, sometimes too honest, about her and Fumikage, and she knew Fumikage would spend nights over. She didn't mind at all, but still, she found that familiar pang of jealousy. It wasn't much, she thought, to just want one person to care about her like that, was it? She turned on her phone and saw a message from Deku. So, I know I should probably wait until you show me your new drawings, but I couldn't resist. I started writing another thing with Ilyasa. If you get mad, blame your awesome drawing. I can't help it. Okako giggled and sent a text back, sleep in the back of her mind. Shoto Todoroki had a singular objective for the day as he walked towards the science building on campus. Talk to Momo and arrange a study date for just the two of them. Simple, really. Anyone could do it, and he had done it before in fact. So, why was he breathing quickly in an attempt to calm his nerves? Nerves, he thought, that should have been calm from the start. Okay, he knew exactly why. The study session was more than a study session, or at least he hoped it would be. He had liked Momo Yaoyorozu since sophomore year in high school. It was possible that he had liked her since even earlier, but it was sophomore year that he became aware of his crush. He had even worked up the courage to ask her when Kyuka had asked her out first. Shoto grimaced. He didn't know why he thought about that time, it always hurt him. Not because Momo went out with Kyuka, though he'd be lying to himself if he denied that entirely. Instead, it was the darkness it had sent him into. He had cut off his feelings for Momo entirely, letting them wither and die. At the time, he had thought it would be better than letting his feelings for Momo cause him pain. Letting them die, though, hurt more than he thought. It felt like smothering a part of him. He ended up avoiding her for a couple of months, when he could, trying to stop feeling for her. It worked, but he was left feeling cold and had a hard time being friendly with her for a while. He hated himself for that. She deserved his friendship, not him being a cold jerk. But his plan had worked, and even when Momo and Kyuka split up a couple of months later, he hadn't felt a thing for her. Until graduation. He hadn't intended on it happening, but it did. At first, he didn't even notice it at first, but when Izuku asked if he had a crush on Momo, he had to re-evaluate himself. All of the texts he had sent, the days he had spent with her studying and hanging out. The flutter of excitement when he saw her, the sparks of joy and affection at her smiles, he had fallen for Momo again, and now it was driving him insane, trying to figure out if she could like him the same way he liked her. At the very least he knew she did like guys. She had confided in him junior year her attraction to an upper-class-man of theirs. But him? Could Momo Yaoyorozu, the beautiful, intensely smart, kind, and amazing girl, like Shoto Todoroki, the seemingly aloof boy with issues that threatened to drag him down into darkness? He sighed and shoved the thoughts away. No time to question himself endlessly, letting his doubts get the best of him. No, this was the time for confidence, for utter faith in himself. Once he reached the science building he waited, hands in his pockets. The air outside had been getting colder as of late, winter making its arrival well known. Winter always reminded him of his mother. She had always loved the snow and found icicles inexplicably beautiful, and as he waited, Shoto absently thought about her. He had seen her just a couple of days ago, and had plans to see her again this weekend. Fuyumi was coming with too, which was good. Mother enjoyed it when Fuyumi visited and discussed her teaching job. It made her smile a lot more, lifted her spirits. Shoto? He snapped out of his reverie and looked up to see Momo and Kyuka approaching him from the building. Denki was just behind them as well, swearing loudly as he ran to catch up. Momo looked at Shoto, her head tilted slightly to the side, a warm, but bemused, smile on her face. What are you doing here? He fumbled with his thoughts for a bit, trying to prepare himself. Damn it! He shouldn't have gotten distracted. I was hoping to talk to you, actually, he said. I forgot my phone at the apartment, otherwise I would have texted you about it. That was true, he did forget his phone this morning, but he also knew that he still would have approached her in person. It seemed more fitting. Denki caught up to them, his blonde hair stuffed beneath a knit cap, though some stuck out beneath, framing his face. Finally! Jesus, Kyuka! Would it kill you to wait up for me? Kyuka gave Denki a look, raising her eyebrow, a small smirk on her lips. Maybe, and wouldn't that be a tragedy? She turned and eyed Shoto for a second. He found her confusing to be around. She was a self-confessed cynic and often acted as if the world around her was uninteresting, and yet she loved to tease. Then there was her past history with Momo and present friendship. She had no feelings that Shoto could determine, but still. Kyuka Gyro was an enigma, and she seemed to know something, the way her eyes lit up. Ah! Momo said with a warm smile. So, what is it that you wanted to tell me? Well, we have a chemistry exam coming up, he said, and I was hoping you would help me out with studying. This weekend would work best if that sounds okay with you. Say tomorrow, . He didn't mention that he had made sure that would be a time when both Izuku and Tenya were out all. Kyuka made a growling noise and Shoto thought he saw her hand clench into a fist. I'm not as great at chemistry as of late, he replied. It wasn't that far from the truth, if he was being honest. He got chemistry, but it didn't come as naturally as most subjects did. Besides, Momo, you're a chemistry major. You know it much better than me. I would love to help. Momo said. I'll drop by tomorrow then. Early afternoon work for you? Sounds great, Shoto said. He smiled and tried to ignore the elation and cheers in his heart. Or at the very least, he tried not to cheer out loud. That would have raised some suspicions. I'll see you then. Have a nice day. Good to see you, Kyuka, Denki. Shoto waved and began to walk back to his apartment, planning tomorrow. Tenya, he decided, was rubbing off on him, but for now he decided to use it to his advantage. Tomorrow, he decided, was going to be perfect. A bit later. Momo walked down the street, trying not to smile too much. Well, she was a naturally smiley person at the best of times, but still. If she smiled too much, she might give away the fact that she extremely excited by what had just happened. It was just her and Kyuka, walking down the street towards their apartment. Denki had another class to attend which explained why he wasn't with them. He and Kyuka had been dating since junior year, though Momo only found out after graduation, and only when she saw them kiss briefly. Kyuka liked to stay tight-lipped about her relationship and Momo wondered if she would have opened up at all about it if she hadn't been found out. But Momo couldn't blame her. She was much the same when it came to Shoto. Her crush on him was not a recent development. No, it had been brewing for a while, since just before graduation. It had shocked her when it happened, too, as she had spent much of her sophomore and junior years convinced that Shoto no longer liked her. He had been so cold, then so aloof. And of course, the return of her loathing hadn't helped. Those years had been hard, the constant whisper of self-doubt telling her to give up. Murmuring half-truths, twisting words, she shuddered. It had been because of her struggle with that loathing, though, that she found herself falling for Shoto. Senior year, during the exams, she had been falling harder than she had before. An episode unlike any others. He had seemed to notice something was wrong and had come to her. Somehow, he lifted her up out of her pit, and she saw a side to him she never had before. Don't get so caught up in your thoughts there, Momo. She blinked and turned to see Kyuka smirking at her with a knowing glint in her eyes. Though I know how excited you are. Excited? Momo asked, trying to play dumb. I don't know what you're talking about, Kyuka. All that happened was Shoto asking me for help. Why would I be excited over that? Kyuka's look told Momo that she wasn't buying it one bit. Who? Tsuyu. I mean, it's definitely not like you like him. She chuckled to herself as if she made a great joke, while Momo felt her cheeks grow warm in the cold weather. I'll let you have this special moment to yourself. But if you want my opinion, I think you have a good shot. Kyuka shrugged. But what would I know? Momo stammered for a second and then sighed. Is it really that obvious? To me, yes, Kyuka said with a small smile. I know you pretty well, Momo. Should I list the reasons? Momo shook her head no, a feeling of despair, but Kyuka didn't seem to notice. Well, 1. You talk to him pretty much every day, almost all day. Every time you see him or a text from him you get this cute smile on your face. You bring him up in conversation without meaning to. Should I go on? No, Momo said with a frown. You didn't even need to start. She loved Kyuka dearly, but sometimes the girl was too much. Besides, even if she did like Shoto, which she had to admit she did, why would he like her? She was full of self-doubt and questioned her every move. That very thing had destroyed her relationship with Kyuka. You'll be fine, Kyuka said, her voice quieter. Trust me, Momo. You got this and I've got your back. Momo looked at her friend and smiled. She opened her mouth to say something and then saw Kyuka's playful smirk. And if he messes up, I'll set him straight. Momo sighed but smiled. Thank you, Kyuka. Her friend waved it off. The oven timer beeped with a methodical and impersonal sense of urgency. As if the oven was telling Shoto that his muffins were at risk, but also didn't give a damn one way or the other. Well, Shoto was feeling nervous enough to appreciate that impersonality. He took out the muffins, checking them with a toothpick to make sure they were good, and turned off the oven, putting the machine to rest. Izuku was the cook of the house, but Shoto had picked up a thing or two. Mainly baking, as his mom loved it when he was younger. Muffins were some of his favorite to bake, and today he had made cinnamon muffins with chocolate chip. Momo's favorite. He took in a deep breath. It was ostensibly to calm down, but he let himself appreciate the sweet cinnamony scent that wafted from the muffins. A teapot sat on the stove, filled with water and ready to be heated. The day before he had made sure they had plenty of tea, much to Izuku's confusion. When Shoto had explained what was going on, Izuku had smiled and wished him luck. Shoto hadn't said anything about asking her out properly during today to Izuku, but he had still known. That seemed to be a little annoying, in Shoto's opinion. After all, the only crush Izuku had ended with him falling into a fountain. The guy should not be as good at picking up on subtext as he is. A knock at the door brought him back to reality and Shoto took a deep breath. Let's do it, he thought. He walked briskly to the door and opened it, smiling when he saw Momo. Right on time, he said, stepping aside to let her in. She smiled gratefully and stepped in, pausing by the kitchen. Did you make muffins? She asked, a curious expression on her face. She sniffed the air. Cinnamon muffins? I thought having something to snack on would be nice, he said, his heart thumping. Please don't think I'm trying too hard. Please, oh please don't. And muffins happen to be a speciality of mine. His smile dimmed a bit. She turned to face him, the expression gone and replaced with a gorgeous smile. Thank you, Shoto. That's incredibly sweet of you. He felt his whole body relax and he realized he had been tensing up. Of course, of course. So, shall we get to work? Make yourself at home on the couch and I'll get the muffins on a plate. He walked into the kitchen and turned back to look at her. I'm assuming you wouldn't mind a cup of tea, would you? You spoil me, Momo laughed. Please, that sounds perfect. Shoto hid a grin and got everything ready before taking his place next to her, a plate of muffins in his hands. He set them on the small coffee table and Momo grabbed one. So, she said as she grabbed a small piece, shall we begin? The next couple of hours flew by quickly, faster than he wanted them to. While they did study, and Shoto actually learned some things he hadn't realized would be useful for the exam, it slowly devolved into them talking and joking around, with small sections of studying. Shoto found himself feeling at ease, his fears washing away like they so often did with Momo. Despite the fact that they had always felt okay with each other by themselves, he had worried that for some reason, this time would be different. Would be worse. But it was the most fun he had had for days. And as they talked and laughed about classes, about their friends, about shows they watched, he found himself growing more and more sure. He could ask her. And it wouldn't be the end. He could ask out Momo Yaoyorozu without ending their friendship if things went wrong. "Hey, Momo," he said in a lull of their conversation. She was currently looking at her chemistry notebook and looked up. Something wrong?" He hadn't realized his tone had shifted into something more serious. "No, nothing's wrong," he said, speaking slowly as he tried to gather and collect his thoughts. He could do this. "I will do this. I was just wondering if dash." A knock at the door cut him off and he and Momo shared confused looks. He held up a hand, as if to tell her he'll finish the thought later, and got up to open the door. What he found nearly caused him to scream with frustration. "Shoto!" Denki exclaimed with a big grin. A hero was with him, and so was Mina, the two of them at least having the sense to look sheepish. Denki, however, seemed to be unable to pick up on anything. "And Momo. Perfect. I was hoping you guys would still be studying." His face morphed into one resembling a puppy dog and his lower lip quivered. "We need serious help with our upcoming exams, and you guys are the smartest people we know. Can you help us? Please?" Shoto wanted nothing more than to say no, shut the door in his face, and finish asking Momo out. He turned to look back at Momo and she gave a small smile and a shrug. Letting out a small sigh, Shoto stepped aside. "Come on in. Always happy to help. God fucking damn it." Kyuka was glad that Momo was out of the apartment. She loved her friend dearly, she really did, but she sometimes felt like she had to hold back with Momo. When Momo was in, she couldn't just let go and lounge in her PJs on the couch, watching shitty movies for no reason than that they were there, or practice her guitar and singing without a fear. Plus, she could invite Denki over. It had been a while since they had some genuine alone time and she could do with a cuddle. Not that anyone would hear her say that, Kyuka had airs to keep up. It wasn't that Momo minded having Denki over, she seemed to enjoy his company if anything, and found them adorable. But it was more anxiety on Kyuka's end. She hated PDA and she didn't like the feeling of other people knowing about her intimate moments. It made her feel vulnerable and she hated that feeling with a passion. Even with Momo, that had taken forever to get out of her system. Probably why they hadn't worked out. With Denki, though, it was easier for some reason. He teased her about it all the time and she had punched him on the shoulder more than once for that, but she never felt scared being vulnerable around him. It was weird. She grabbed her phone to text her boyfriend and found 2 new messages waiting for her. One from Momo and the other Denki. The Denki one was him explaining that he, a hero, and Mina were studying. The Momo text was a half-hour later, and it seemed urgent as it wasn't punctuated properly. Kyuka's eyes widened and she leaped off the bed. The text had read, "Your boyfriend came by just as Shoto seemed to be getting ready to say something, and now things feel awkward and I don't know what to do. Please come." She ran into her room and hurriedly threw on some clothes, cursing under her breath. Of course. Oh, of course. He would do that, the lovable idiot. He was so bad at reading cues. It had taken him weeks to figure out that Kyuka had asked him out one time, and he only realized it when they started dating. He wouldn't get what was going on. Why? As she ran out of her apartment, Kyuka made a small promise to kill Denki. Not too horribly, she still loved him. But just a little, for Momo's sake. An hour later, the apartment of Shoto, Izuku, and Tenya. How did this all happen? Shoto thought as walked into the kitchen to get himself some water. Everything had started so promising and he had just been about to ask her out when, boom. Surprise Denki, a hero, and Mina. At least Mina seemed to grasp she had interrupted something, as she had pulled him aside to apologize profusely and ask if she should get the others to leave. She didn't need the studying, she pointed out, she had just been with a hero that day. Shoto had been tempted to follow up on the offer, but the boys did need the help and the moment was ruined. So he let them stay. Didn't mean he didn't feel a little annoyed when Toru showed up a bit later, but he kept in check. She had been told by Mina, who looked incredibly ashamed when Shoto shot her a glare, that they would all be studying over here and she needed help with a paper. And then Kyuka showed up, though she seemed to know what was going on. She quickly talked with Momo and then sighed heavily, sitting next to her and Denki, half listening to everything. She seemed almost as mad as Shoto was frustrated. As for Momo, Shoto couldn't tell. She was in full teacher mode, holding the attention of whatever student needed her help. If she was upset, she didn't show it. As far as Shoto could tell, she wasn't bothered at all. Of course she wasn't. She probably didn't know what Shoto had intended to do. He sighed as he leaned against the kitchen counter, trying to think about it all in a positive way. He would have another chance, surely. Another knock at the door caused him to nearly growl in frustration, but then it evaporated. The damage was done and one more person wasn't going to cause more harm than had already been done. He opened it up and was genuinely surprised to find the round, cheery face of Okako Uraraka looking up at him. "Okako," he asked, lifting his eyebrows up. "Why was she here?" "Is Deku in?" she asked, the nickname seeming to barely register to her as it passed her lips. Shoto raised an eyebrow though, only Katsuki called Izuku that. But it at least explained why she was here. "He's at work, unfortunately," Shoto said with a small, apologetic smile. "You're welcome to wait inside for him if you want. His room is empty." She laughed and shook her head. "Nah, it's okay. Thanks anyways though. I was just going to drop some stuff off for him, anyways. I should have texted him first." She frowned and looked up at him. "You okay, Shoto?" He raised an eyebrow. Could she tell? "Just a bit tired," he said. Okako nodded, warily though. He smiled again and stepped aside. "Why don't you drop the stuff off on his desk? I'll grab paper so you can leave a note if you want." "That would be great." He two of them attacked the pasta, making small talk when possible. Never out of a need to fill the silence, though. Shoto had long since become comfortable with Mashirao. Their friendship had been a new development, in terms of the group. He had always gotten along with Mashirao, but they hadn't been close. However, during a post-graduation camping trip the group had gone on, Shoto had ended up driving into town with Mashirao in Zu's mom's minivan to pick up supplies, only to get caught in a storm and forced to stay in town. The two, spending the night in a small, cheap motel room, ended up talking and got along well. Shoto admired Mashirao's calm in even the most trying of circumstances and found himself enjoying the blonde boy's company. The talk turned to their group and Shoto ended up revealing his crush on Momo. He could still remember that vividly. The storm raging outside, wind howling and rain pounding the roof. Mashirao hadn't seemed surprised and instead just offered comfort. He had just started dating Toru and was willing to help buck up Shoto when he let his doubt get to him. Ever since, the two of them had been close, trying to hang out, just the two of them, every month or so. Once they finished, Mashirao fixed Shoto with an even look. He wouldn't ask about how things went, he preferred to have Shoto willingly open up. With a sigh, Shoto pushed away his plate and swirled the soda remaining in his bottle. "You know pretty much what happened." Mashirao nodded. "Pretty much," he said. Shoto grimaced at the unasked question. "It's frustrating," he said after a moment of thought. I didn't want it to feel like a date. Didn't want to make her feel pressured. But as soon as something happened that made it clear we weren't dating, I got frustrated." "Is that silly?" His friend shook his head with a small smile. "No. When I had a crush on Toru, every chance I got to be alone with her was a godsend. When they got interrupted, I always felt this weird rush of frustration and guilt, like I was upset at whoever ended it, but felt guilty because, well, they didn't do anything wrong." Shoto sighed and nodded. That pretty much nails it." "Do you think Momo was feeling something similar?" Mashirao shrugged. "When I told Toru, after we started dating, about those moments we spent together and how I felt, she said she had always felt something similar. If you think Momo did too, then maybe you have a shot." He didn't have an answer for that. He was still bad at reading people. Even with how much he had grown from freshman year of high school, he still had trouble deciphering what people felt. Simple emotions were easier, but more complex ones, like what Mashirao was asking if Momo felt, were so much harder. I don't know if she did, he said slowly, and I don't know how I would find out. Well, you might not, Mashirao said. People are complex, Shoto. You know that. We're weird and hard to predict and understand. And, at the same time, we're super emotional. I think you'll figure it out, given time. He stood up and smiled. If you want my opinion, I think you should try again. Don't be afraid to take a risk either, Shoto. You two are adults. You can handle it and so can she. I believe in you. A couple of hours later. Mashirao had left the apartment an hour earlier, after refusing Shoto's every attempt to pay him back for the food. He was always like that, but Shoto always insisted. His mother would have been appalled if he didn't offer. Once he was alone, Shoto got to cleaning the apartment, making sure not a single crumb remained on the floor. It was mostly to help him think, let him collect his thoughts. Izuku wouldn't care that much and Tenya wasn't that much of a neat freak. But cleaning helped him think, so he cleaned the entire kitchen and living room. Tenya called to let him know he would be home late. He had promised to help a teacher out at school and had ran into my Hatsume, an old flame. Shoto wasn't sure what she was to Tenya and doubted that Tenya knew either. Point was, Tenya had got caught up and was going to be home a bit later. Izuku walked in a few minutes later, smiling as always. Shoto! He found himself smiling as his green-haired roommate practically bounced into the apartment. How did your study session go? It went well, he said absently. How about you? How was your day? Another day at Plus Ultra, Izuku said with a shrug. He started to head towards his room, still chatting. It was actually kind of slow today, though we've been getting a lot of online orders for the plushes. Iko was going kind of crazy. Shoto made a humming sound of acknowledgement as his mind flitted between ideas. He had been debating asking Momo for another study session again, or to just go get coffee or something. He was running out of ideas. Hey, Shoto! He turned to see Izuku standing behind him, a curious look on his face. He was holding the papers Okako left. Okako! Thank you all for watching this video. Check out the maker of the fanfic down below and goodbye.